Joe Biden announced his executive order requiring federal employees and also companies that do contracted work with the federal government to get vaccinated within the next 75 days. There are exceptions for people who might have health concerns as a result of the vaccine, or people who might have religious reasons for not getting the vaccine. But outside of that, everyone in the federal government, every employee and contracted workers for the federal government are expected to get vaccinated in 75 days. Here's Biden talking about it during his press conference to announce this executive order.
I will sign an executive order that will now require all executive branch federal employees to be vaccinated, all. And I've signed another executive order that will require federal contractors to do the same. If you want to work with the federal government and do business with us, get vaccinated. If you want to do business with the federal government, vaccinate your workforce. And tonight, I'm removing one of the last remaining obstacles that make it difficult for you to get vaccinated. The Department of Labor will require employers with 100 or more workers to give those workers paid time off to get vaccinated. No one should lose pay in order to get vaccinated or take a loved one to get vaccinated.
So, Nando, what are your thoughts about what Biden announced yesterday?
I'm generally pro. I generally am pro-vaccine mandates. I don't see them as like terribly coercive. I mean, I am sympathetic to the argument that a good chunk, if not the majority of people who are not vaccinated are not like, Trump right-wing cranks or woo-woo kind of new age type people, but often just very low income people who are very checked out of the system or just have all kinds of difficulties. Like I am sympathetic to that. And I would hope that the vaccine mandate comes with, aid for certain people and things like that. But in principle, I'm not against vaccine mandates. I mean, and I understand that the Biden administration had to do something, given that something like 1,500 people are dying a day from COVID still. I mean, it's weird because we've kind of accepted it. It just kind of washes over us. Whereas last year it was around that same number, and it was like seen as a huge emergency, and people criticized the Trump administration quite rightly for its lack of response or its lack of doing anything. Whereas the deaths keep on rolling, but we don't. We don't treat them the same way as it was. I'm not saying it's only because it was Trump and it's been now Biden. I think it's just also a factor of just, people get used to things over time, and we've just gotten used to it. But I understand that they have to do something. My position on vaccines has always been the best thing possible would be to pay people to get vaccinated, to tie it to a certain kind of stimulus. Another round of $1,400 checks, except this time you show up with a vaccine thing and you get the $1,400 or whatever, whatever the number may be, as well as a loosening of vaccine patents internationally to allow anyone or any country to manufacture their own vaccines, as well as, us providing aid and all that stuff to other countries. Because again, if there's a problem in the United States of people not getting vaccinated, then it's just as much of a problem if people in Angola or wherever are not getting vaccinated, not because they're anti-vaxxers, but because they just don't have the vaccines there. I mean, there's frontline workers in Africa who just can't get the vaccine. They don't have them there. And that's as much of a problem in a global economy in terms of suppressing this virus. So again, I think that the protestations from the right about, a new Gestapo or whatever are hysterical. We have vaccine mandates for all kinds of other things. Like the legality of them are pretty obviously, it's pretty obvious that they exist. I don't see it as a hugely coercive thing. I mean, as I understand it, even this quote unquote vaccine mandate allows for people who don't want to get vaccinated to get tested once a week, which also doesn't seem like terribly coercive in the context of a global pandemic. Like if we can't ask people to do anything, if anything that the government asks people to do is coercion, then we can't ask people to do anything, I think in the context of a global pandemic where thousands of people in the United States are dying every single day, asking people to do something is reasonable. I don't see it as a new form of fascism.
Right. I mean, I 100% agree with vaccine mandates. We've had vaccine mandates for quite some time now. I remember, my mom having to show my vaccination papers to the administrators at the LAUSD before I was admitted or enrolled in the school system. So I had to be vaccinated against polio, tetanus. There were other vaccines that I can't even remember at this point. But the idea isn't like, I think the problem is, we've been conditioned in America to think of everything in terms of the individual as opposed to the collective, right? Yeah. And I mean, that's very much intentional. But when it comes to a contagious virus and a global pandemic, that's the exact kind of thinking that puts you at quite a disadvantage, right? And unfortunately, everything related to COVID from the very beginning was politicized as part of this culture war. And that's the incredibly frustrating part, right? Where people are encouraged to not think about this logically, but to think about this as an identity issue, as something that, separates you from the libs if you're a conservative. It's been frustrating from the jump. But I will say, in terms of federal employees and workers who are contracted to work with the federal government, all of them have to get vaccinated. It's a mandate. So there is no, all right, well, you can get tested every week instead. There are very few exceptions. As I mentioned, there's the religious exception, or if you have certain health issues that would prevent you from getting the vaccine, those are the exceptions in place. However, OSHA has also gotten involved, and they're having an impact on private companies with employees of 100 and more. So what Biden mentioned in the tail end of that clip is so important. And I think it's honestly the little talked about issue in the corporate media. I've heard, Ben Burgess bring this up. You kind of, lightly touched on it. It's the issue of people who don't have the luxury of taking time off of work to both get the vaccine, but also to recover from the vaccine, right? So most people that I've heard from, myself included, by the way, had like about a 24-hour period where you're kind of like not feeling so great. You're a little under the weather, right? For me, it lasted 24 hours and then I was good to go. But, I remember I got vaccinated my second shot on a Friday, and, Jacobin gave me the next day off because are they not merciful?
Thank you, Commissar Bosker.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And same would have been the situation with TYT. If I need to take a day off, I'm not going to worry about losing pay as a result of that. But a lot of Americans don't have that. They should have that, but they don't have that. And so what Biden mentioned in the tail end of that clip is, no, you must give your employees time off to get vaccinated, which is great. The other thing is the expansive rules mandate that all employers with more than 100 workers require them to be vaccinated or test for the virus weekly, affecting 80 million Americans, and the roughly 17 million workers at health facilities that receive federal Medicare or Medicaid also have to be fully vaccinated. So there's like a two-tiered system, I guess. If you're a private employer, you do get to give your employees an option, but if they choose not to get vaccinated, they have to get tested every week. But if you work for the federal government, you must be vaccinated with few exceptions.
The other thing, what I'm, you're mentioning the need for employers to give people time off. The other, I mean, the sad reality is that there's a lot of people in America who have quote unquote employers, but they're gig workers. So they're in a way, they're technically self-employed. They can take as much time off as they want, but then that means they're not getting paid. It's not like they're getting paid time off. That's why I think tying it to some form of stimulus, I would love to see that happen. I don't think it's going to happen, but that's why tying it to some form of stimulus would actually be the fairest way to do it, especially given the reality of the modern economy, in which there's a huge chunk of the workforce that is self-employed, and if they're not working, they're not earning money. So that's just another aspect. Like, I mean, Uber's gonna be like, yeah, sure, take the day off, Uber driver. We're not going to pay you anyway.
I know, exactly. No, that's a great point about gig workers. And I was reading about how much the gig economy has really exploded, which is depressing. And one of the more recent stats shows that 1 in 3 American workers are now part of the gig economy. So it gives you, yeah, I think the point you make about tying the vaccine to a stimulus, I think that would be far more effective, but there just isn't the willpower to do it in Congress. I don't think that Biden can do that through executive order. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that would be a better strategy. And to your point, look, the numbers of new COVID cases has really shot up. The US is seeing about 300% more COVID-19 infections a day, about 2.5 times more hospitalizations, and nearly twice the number of deaths compared to the same time last year. Some 80 million people remain unvaccinated. So to your point, Nando, you mentioned how many people are dying a day. So recently, the numbers have shot up even more. But if you look at like the last month, on average, about 1,000 people are dying a day. And you have, I can't even believe this, 140,000 new cases a day, which blows my mind. So I do think that this was the right way to go. And again, I think we're both supportive of the mandate. And
it seems like a huge percentage, if not 100% of the people, or close to 100% of the people who are dying are unvaccinated. That the vaccine doesn't necessarily protect you from getting COVID, but like it does protect you from the worst effects of it. And you're not seeing as many stories of like young people getting intubated and things like that, like what was happening in the early days of COVID. I'm guessing it's the vaccine is working in that sense. It mitigates against the worst effects, like lessens the loads on hospitals, on the medical system, and just reduces the number of deaths. So yeah. Yeah,
I mean it's just a no-brainer to get vaccinated, but some people might need a little more help, more accessibility, and in some cases, a little more encouragement. And Ben Burgess also makes this point, which I think is accurate, about employers mandating the vaccine. On one hand, yes, it's coercive, but you have to kind of balance that out with what's the best option for public health, right? And so I respect that perspective, because it's a way of kind of like, let's not pretend like this isn't like forcing people to get vaccinated. It is, right? You could lose your job in some cases if your employer mandates it. But in terms of public health and keeping people alive, this is, it's worth that cost. And then finally, I wanted to just touch on something that you brought attention to this morning, Nando, while we were talking about the show and what we should talk about. The notion of denying health care to individuals who refuse to get vaccinated and then end up in the hospital. So there's a video I want to get to first, and it features Jimmy Kimmel. So let's watch.
Dr. Fauci said that if hospitals get any more overcrowded, they're going to have to make some very tough choices about who gets an ICU bed. That choice doesn't seem so tough to me. Vaccinated person having a heart attack? Yes, come right on in. We'll take care of you. Unvaccinated guy who gobbled horse goo? Rest in peace, Wheezy.
Yeah, I didn't like that, right? Like, I understand the frustration, and that's been something that's bothered me. Like the idea of someone who's sick with some other issue not being able to go to the hospital or be admitted to the hospital because the hospital is like full of COVID patients. It's frustrating because it's something that can be prevented, but you can't deny care to people. And some might argue he's just joking around, but it seems like the audience loved that point.
Yeah, I mean, again, I push back against the notion that the percentage, like if you said 80 million Americans are unvaccinated, I'm not sure that like even the overwhelming majority of those are like right wingers. I'm just skeptical of that. I think they're the loudest and they're the ones that the media covers the most. I've seen it in my personal life. I'm sure you have as well. That it's a weird. It cuts across a weird partisan thing. It's not as neat as as some of these other issues. It's not as neat as the libs might think. They might think like, oh, it's only like those annoying Trumpers that aren't getting vaccinated, and like there's a lot of those going around, but there's also a lot of liberals who are not getting vaccinated. I live in Venice, Santa Monica area. the vaccines in the Senate, that's lib city, and they don't like vaccines there too much either. I mean, there's been stories in the past of like measles outbreaks and things like that in Santa Monica because parents refuse to vaccinate their children, and these are not Trumpers by any stretch of the imagination. These are affluent liberals. So the vaccine issue is not as neat as some of these liberals would like to believe. They see it as like a form of identity, as like everything is coming around these days, but it's just not as neat. And again, that kind of thing is that's just a right wing view of the world. Like, I'm sorry, like that's just a personal responsibility. That's just a right wing view of the world. Like that is, denying people's healthcare because of something like that that's just wrong.
It's pretty callous. Yeah, it's pretty callous.
If you enjoyed this video from Jacobin Weekends, please hit like and subscribe. That way, you'll enjoy all of our backlog, as well as all of our future content, including interviews, live streams, and clips. Thank you.